It's an important day today. Today is the Climate and Peace Day, and we're very happy that Climate and Peace Day started last year in COP28, and now we are celebrating that as a standard day that we celebrate every year in COP20 in COP sessions. We also today have a milestone, significant milestone, on the endorsement of the Baku Call and the Baku Climate Hub, Climate and Peace Hub, that has been signed and launched by COP29. Before starting welcoming our panelists, respectful panelists here, I would like to say that this Baku Hub and Baku Call is actually a continuation and operationalization of the effort that started in COP26 as a discussion and has been materialized as a great initiative by COP27 CRISP that's been led by Ambassador Ahmed and one of our panelists and partners in this session, and then the Declaration on Climate Peace, Recovery and Transition in COP28. So we're very, very happy that we're having this timely session today, which will be actually focusing on Africa and the Middle East, which is the key region that has been affected by multiple crises. Over and above that, climate crisis, which actually has put a lot of the communities into vulnerability, displacement, migration, but also affected their accessibility to a livelihood, to good health, good education, food, etc. So please allow me to start by announcing and actually presenting our panelists today. We have with us Ms. Freeman, who took office this Monday, June 11th, 2024. Oh my God. Actually, she brings more than 30 years of experience in the field of peace and security. And she is currently the Deputy Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for West Africa and Sahel. Our second panelist, so please welcome her with me. Second is Ambassador Ahmed Abdel Latif, the Director General of the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peace Building and Peacekeeping, and the lead of the CRISP initiative of COP27. And actually, the center is specifically very close to my heart since it started, and it's belonged to my beloved country, Egypt. So he's a brother from my own country, and I'm so happy and proud that they are taking a lead in such discussions. And please welcome Ambassador Ahmed. And definitely we cannot talk about Africa and Middle East without bringing the voice of youth. So I'm so happy that we have with us Pedro. Pedro is the co-lead to the Global Finance and Investment Research Area, the Alliance of Biodiversity International and Climate Action Liver. Okay. And he is young. So maybe he's not a youth champion, but he looks young. So he can bring actually the expert voice of a young leader discussing with us the climate finance aspect and how can we leverage that to support the climate and peace. So please welcome him with me. Starting this conversation, I would like to actually address Ms. Freeman. And it will really be important as the special representative to the UN Secretary General for West Africa and Sahel to pose on the climate change and its implication in West Africa and the Sahel. And how can you ensure that climate security also integrate human mobility in the context of the climate change? What are we doing, specifically focusing on women and girls, and how can we include them into the different initiatives and programs?
Good afternoon. Is this, it's on? Good afternoon. Thank you, moderator. This is Rania, Director of Climate Action for IOM. Is this on? Okay, it is. Okay, because it doesn't sound on. All right. Ambassador, Director General of the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peace Building. It's an honor for me to speak today on this critical theme with a focus on its interlinkages to human mobility and displacement from a West Africa perspective. In line with the Security Council mandate of UNOWAS, which calls for addressing climate change, energy poverty, and natural disasters by assisting governments, UNOWAS has carried out gender-sensitive, climate-related security risk assessments in Liberia, Senegal, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Nigeria. These assessments highlighted the confluence between climate change and security and the critical role of human mobility in shaping local conflict dynamics. I'm just going to give you a few examples. In Mauritania, climate change is exacerbating tensions between refugee groups, mostly women and children, and local communities, as well as between herders, both local and transhumant, and farmers in the Haut El Shargi and Guidimaka regions. In the Lake Chad Basin, conflicts over dwindling resources are intensifying as many agricultural areas are abandoned and secure zones overexploited, contributing to increasingly violent competition for scarce resources. In Difa, Niger, flooding in 2022 displaced populations, especially women and children, over a 12-kilometer radius, leading to heightened tensions between displaced individuals and local farming communities. In Nigeria, transhumance routes have been disrupted as herders move further south in search of water and pasture, fueling inter-community violence and exacerbating the security risks from violent extremism. These examples show that climate change not only heightens inequality, such as food insecurity and displacement, but also creates new vulnerabilities that feed into existing conflict dynamics. Women and children are disproportionately affected, highlighting the necessity for gender-sensitive interventions to address these challenges. It is important to recognize that human mobility is a fundamental aspect of resilience, contributing to the development of societies. This is especially true of the Sahel, where populations, mostly women, youth, and children, move in accordance with the weather and rainfall patterns as they've done for millennia. The challenge today is to ensure that human mobility is integrated into international climate processes and national policies, which remain crucial to inclusive and gender-sensitive displacement responses at the local level. This requires incorporating gender disaggregated and gender-specific data and analysis to develop targeted, effective solutions. This year, in the context of climate-induced displacement, West Africa and the Sahel have been particularly impacted by the heaviest rainfall and flooding in over 30 years. In Niger, Mali, and Nigeria, flooding has led to the displacement of more than 1.6 million people, mostly women, youth, and children, with hundreds of lives lost. To be more specific, in Niger, 217 deaths were reported, with over 353,000 people affected and 100,000 people displaced due to flooding from overflowing rivers. In Nigeria, floods have displaced more than 227,000 people across 27 regions. In Senegal, more than 56,000 people have been displaced by flooding amid significant agricultural and infrastructural damage. These disasters have exacerbated existing conflicts, especially in areas already affected by violent extremism and intercommunal tensions. They compound the challenges of local governance in fragile settings. In the Lake Chad Basin, climate-induced resource scarcity is exacerbating tensions between fishing, farming, and herding communities, compelling many to modify traditional migration patterns. Climate change may not always be the primary cause of displacement, but it is undeniably a significant contributor to humanitarian and security crises. Allow me to speak a little bit more about transhumance in the context of climate security. While transhumance, the migration of cattle herders, has been practiced for centuries, climate change is altering traditional movement routes, heightening farmer-herder conflicts, especially in regions like northern Mali and Nigeria, where armed groups have exacerbated the situation. The use of firearms by herders and farmers has made these conflicts particularly deadly. From 2020 to 2024, there have been 1,556 casualties due to farmer-herder conflicts in Nigeria and the Central Sahel, with Nigeria accounting for 80% of them, of the fatalities. Migration, both intra-regional and extra-continental, has also intensified. Surveys in the Central Sahel show that 87% of respondents anticipate that they may move away from their homes due to climate change, primarily driven by soil degradation, loss of livelihoods, and food insecurity. While most communities on the move remain within the region, a significant portion move towards coastal West Africa and beyond. In response to these challenges, UNOWAS has actively engaged in promoting integrated approaches to climate security, including the collection of gender disaggregated data and support to women and youth-led community initiatives. Most recently, in September 2024, in Lomé, Togo, we organized, in collaboration with IOM and the UN Regional Working Group on Climate Change, Environment, Security and Development, a regional dialogue on climate change and mobility. This dialogue, with participants from 16 countries and civil society organizations, including women and youth-led organizations, led to the identification of best practices and actions to integrate climate change and mobility into national policies. At the ECOWAS Regional COP29 preparatory meeting, mobility was prioritized as a key regional issue, underscoring the importance of addressing displacement in climate negotiations. The Kampala Ministerial Declaration on Migration, Environment, and Climate Change, signed by 11 West African countries, reflects national commitments to building resilience for climate-displaced populations. Finally, the cross-border transhumance agreement between Niger and Chad, signed in August of this year, represents a significant step towards managing farmer-herder conflicts. UNOWAS continues to support ECOWAS in developing a farmer and herder handbook and intends to launch the Regional Community of Practice on Farmers and Herders, which will convene its first in-person meeting in Dakar in early 2025. So to conclude, climate change is reshaping patterns of mobility across West Africa and the Sahel, forcing more people, especially women, youth, and children, to migrate. Long-term recovery plans must incorporate youth and gender-sensitive interventions, women-led initiatives, youth-led initiatives, and promote youth and female leadership in policy implementation to foster inclusive resilience. This calls for a comprehensive and coordinated approach to address the root causes of instability and ensure that no one is left behind in the face of climate-induced displacement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ms. Freeman. And really, you mentioned a number of very important things. The numbers and the evidence and the data of the number of the people have been displaced due to climate crisis and other crises, but also the focus on women and girls. And part of the solution was a different declaration that's been signed, but most important, how we put it into actions, like the Kampala Declaration and other. So thank you so much for this reminder that there are frameworks and declarations exist, but we need to build upon and operationalize it to ensure that we support the women and girls and communities affected by the climate crisis in a humanitarian setting. Thank you so much for that. And now I'll go to Ambassador Abdel Latif. Ambassador Abdel Latif, as an organization that's focusing on peacekeeping and peace building, and I think the CRISPy initiative was the first initiative that formalized the discussion around climate displacement in peace settings in COP27. Definitely, the region of Middle East and North Africa is not an easy region. And when we talk about climate-induced displacement, climate responses for human mobility in this region, we talk about regions that suffer with intensified multiple crises. It will be great to tell us how can we holistically address the growing implication of conflict, climate-induced displacement on peace and security. And it will be great also to tell us what the center, example from what the center has been doing to support with other partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you so much. Pleasure to being here at the IOM Pavilion. And I want to start by paying a tribute. I want to pay a tribute to IOM for its leadership on the climate, peace, and security nexus. Not only the displacement and climate, but more generally. I mean, we saw that the high-level panel this morning that launched the Baku call and the Baku hub was done in partnership with IOM. So IOM really has had an amazing contribution in connecting displacement with peace and displacement with climate and climate, peace, and displacement. And we have been fortunate to also count on the partnership with IOM as COP27. COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh was the first COP in its outcome decision to mention climate mobility and climate displacement, thanks to the efforts and the cooperation with IOM on this. And then when we went to tackle the climate, peace, and security issues through this initiative that, Rania, you mentioned, that we as a center were involved in, the climate responses for sustaining peace, we also made sure that one of the pillars of this initiative was related to displacement, durable solution to climate displacement. And we immediately found a very strong and reliable partner in IOM to drive the work on this issue under the initiative. And finally, IOM has been key partner of the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development, which is our flagship policy forum on peace and security, where for us this whole conversation started. Because I come from the world and peace and security, and the world of peace and security for a long time was not really seized by the displacement issue. You know, although when you look at Africa and now the Middle East as the biggest number of displaced people, and the conflicts on the rise, many displacements are taking a permanent feature in conflict. So it has huge implications. And when we did the first edition of the Aswan Forum, for the first time we connected displacement with peace building in a really high-level setting and raising awareness about it, again with the partnership with IOM and other organizations. So we first did the connection between peace and displacement, and then climate, peace, and displacement in 2022 with the CRISP initiative. So I think it's important to understand this sequence. And I know, having worked in this area for several years, I really believe that when we talk about climate, peace, and security, displacement is the major issue. Because it is about people moving. Because of conflict, mostly because of conflict. I mean, the number of displaced people by conflict is higher than by climate, but this might change in the future. We know that the numbers tell us that by end of century, it could be 100 million displaced in Africa by climate, 20 million in North Africa. So huge. We see the conflict in Sudan. 1 million people displaced to neighboring countries, including 500,000 to Egypt at least. You know, huge numbers. Mostly women also and young people. So they are at the heart of this also challenge. So what can we do and what are the solutions? There are two things that we think are very important. Is to have this holistic approach. We need to have an integrated approach, and you've also talked about it, in tackling this nexus, in particular by also relying on the HDP nexus, the Humanitarian Development Peace nexus. This nexus is key to rationalize efforts, to mobilize in a more certain manner, to enhance cooperation among the actors, and to move from short-term emergency responses to long-term peace and development, to anchor responses to displacement in peace-building framework, in long-term development for the host countries and the countries affected by these issues. So that is one key issue to do. And then in particular is to differentiate the displacement trends. The fact that women and youth are more greatly impacted, more greatly vulnerable, makes us also, we have to adapt and make sure that our responses to displacement induced by conflict and climate are also gender sensitive and address the differentiated needs of youth and women. And we are, our main work is a capacity building center, and we focus a lot on capacity building. So this is another level we think we need to bring together a lot of the actors who work in silos, even within governments, within governance, the parts of this, including in conflict-affected countries, are not moving together. We find that interior ministry is in one part, peace building in another part, climate is in another part. They need to work together in a holistic manner. So we have developed a training called Climate Programming for Sustaining Peace. First training developed in Africa on the climate peace nexus, and it features displacement as a key aspect of it. So to raise awareness among African policymakers about the need to bring together these holistic integrated responses. And finally, maybe also to mention the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Next year we'll have 25 years of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and it's also an agenda that we need to bring more into this discussion, because it's an agenda that highlights and brings forward the role of women as agents for peace, agents of relief and recovery in face of these humanitarian crises. And I think it is also an entry point and an opportunity also to leverage and to bring forward their role and to have more responses adapted to their needs. So I'll stop here. And again, thank you very much for all what you have done for this discussion to move forward at the international level in Africa and in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Ahmed. And thank you for bringing also the length of not just displacement and women and girls and the importance of their protection throughout in different humanitarian but also development setting. But also thank you for tackling on the capacity building. We think that people know enough? No. Still a lot of things are happening around us, and the capacity building of communities, governments, and young people, women leaders is extremely crucial and important. So thank you for that.
Unfortunately, I have to leave, and I apologize, but I also want to, I'm sorry, but I think CGIR is also doing good work, and they have scaled up their engagement on this. So great to have you, and also thank you for your collaboration. Thank you again, and I'm sorry I have to
Thank
go
you,
to
Ambassador Ahmed. Thank you so much. So, Mr. Pedro, CGIAR is a global research partnership for food secure future dedicated to transformation, food, land, and water system in climate crisis. I think that when we talk about the Baku call and the Baku hub today, it was integral in it, the discussion around food security, water scarcity, land, and what you are doing as an organization is extremely important. You are also a co-lead of the Pillar 2 under the CRISP initiative, so I'm sure your efforts in supporting the Baku call and Baku hub will be a continuation of what you started already with the CRISP initiative. So please allow me to ask you a question. And how should we conceptualize the role of food, land, and water systems in the context of conflict and displacement? And how can they aid in the transition from emergency response to transitioning to a long-term sustainable development?
Thank you very much, Rania, and I would like to once again also congratulate IOM on the work that it has been doing, including the work that was launched today with the Baku Hub. And the question that you've asked is actually pertinent when we're talking about conflict, fragility, and migration. Food, land, and water systems play a very critical role when it comes to understanding the different complexities that are brought about in this compounded crisis, due to the fact that it plays a role in a twofold manner. We have conflict that exacerbates the food insecurity in a changing climate, but the reverse is also true. And we find that these complexities make it difficult for both response and preparedness when it comes to being able to actually provide food for communities that are affected by both crises, especially in countries that are facing them. If you look at today, when you look at the countries that are facing climate challenges, out of the 25 countries that are facing the most severe climate challenges, 13 of them are facing also conflict. And this definitely puts up the question of, in terms of long-term sustainability, how are we going to be able to support these communities to guarantee that they have food, right? But also, how are we going to make sure that the long-term benefits of the responses that we're providing will actually also help to reduce both transhumance and resource-based conflict in the longer term? So these are definitely issues that the CGIAR has been thinking a lot about in both supporting the development of evidence around the existence of resources when we're talking about land and water, but also evidence in terms of how conflict has actually impacted both food production, but also how climate change has actually changed, as was very well said by Deputy Special Representative Barry, the issue around how conflict also affects not how conflict, but how climate also affects migration routes, right? So these are definitely issues that we definitely need to think more about. We have been working with different partners such as IOM, UNHCR, in terms of also being able to support them in better understanding the complexities within the climate and peace nexus. Hopefully we will continue to engage in these different partnerships to provide the tools to actually allow for the different institutions operating in this space to actually be able to make informed decisions in how they respond and how they prepare communities as well for these different crises. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pedro. Let me follow up and ask you a small question, because now the whole Baku Hub is about operationalization. So how do you see the role of the research supporting into operationalization strategies to ensure that we have gender-sensitive displacement responses?
So I think it's very important that we provide capacity for different policymakers in terms of understanding both how climate and mobility have actually impacted dynamics at the household level. So that there is better information in terms of the different strategies that we do have to put in place to be able to contribute positively to resolving the issues around migration and conflict. I think that one thing that has definitely been a challenge for a lot of organizations is bringing together the climate science and understanding around migration to be able to provide just-in-time predictions about how the situation will unfold with the changing climate. And that is a lot of work that we've been doing through the Climate Security Observatory that the CGIAR Focus on Climate Security has been working on, but also the different climate security profiling that has been being done in the region and across the global south. So I think that being able to provide the evidence that will allow for decision makers to be able to identify the correct interventions that need to be put in place is definitely a large contribution that we can bring to the table. But also in terms of looking at the different work that we've done, supporting organizations in actually developing different interventions, but also understanding the impact of those interventions to be able to also identify the correct solutions that will actually generate positive impact and guarantee that there is social cohesion amongst the communities, and to actually be able to produce interventions that do support development, not only for the communities in general that are there, but also guaranteeing that we're in a participatory manner, taking into account the views of the local communities, the indigenous communities that are there, that have the traditional knowledge in terms of how they have actually addressed climate change with mobility. We need to remember that in some cases and in a lot of countries, mobility and transhumance are part of their indigenous traditions, and it is important that we work with them to provide them with the right information, not only at the policy level, but also providing the right information to them, making them also understand what are the changes that are happening along their routes, so that they understand what are the best places for them to go, but also being able to, I think, provide good information for host communities also to be able to know how they can adapt to the changes that are coming through due to both conflict and climate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pedro. And I think that you actually touched on a very important point, which is definitely the power of evidence and data and research. And I think I didn't sit in any meeting or event since even before COP where everyone was highlighting it's extremely important. And I think in a humanitarian setting, it's more important to be able to tackle the different crises and how it's implicate plus climate into the livelihood of communities. But also the important point of making sure that the communities are aware and making sure that they have the tools that help them to have a decision in their lives and in their livelihood. And talking about that, I would like to come back to Ms. Freeman and ask you the question about the people and about how can national and local ownership be prioritized in durable solutions or displaced populations, for example, in Somalia. And we heard Somalia was very high into the discussion, or in any other country. And I'm choosing Somalia because I think in this COP with the GCF funding to Somalia, everyone was focusing, and it is a country that has been suffering with multiple crises and with multiple displacement, etc. So it will be really good to hear from you, and from your point of view, from your experience, how do you see the role of national and local ownership?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Pedro, for your remarks. I think those were excellent. I think, first off, it is really important to get the metrics right. And I think we all know there's a challenge in that. There's a challenge in the way that climate change is interpreted across regions, countries, everywhere. So I think it's really important that at that scientific higher level that the communities come together to really build a better shared understanding of the impacts of climate change in different environments. But then in terms of communities, I think when you were speaking, I was the one thing that I was thinking of, because I was just listening to another panel with Minister of Environment from South Sudan speaking, and saying, look, but people also need to listen to us. We need to, so I think we in the international community need to be very careful that we're not just providing information and analysis and solutions to local communities, many of whom might have their own solutions if we would just listen to them. And that gets me to something that, what Pedro said, and I talked about the transhumance, about migration. This is, the migration, particularly of cattle herders, not only in Africa, I mean, in many other parts of the world. I'm from the U.S. Look, in the Western U.S., it's very similar. But so understanding that those are cultural practices that should not be disrupted. But at the same time, where climate change has made those traditional practices more dangerous, if you will. I think then, we all need to be looking at what adaptations are necessary. And just to give an example of what I mean by that, it's the simple, the sort of simple situation of, in the past, in many countries where you had the cattle herders moving during the dry season, and they would cross farmlands. Well, there would usually, many communities had mechanisms in place. The cattle herders crossed through a field. There was a way that they would pay for the damage. A lot of that has been disrupted because of people are more on the move. You've got, for example, in some countries where there's less and less arable land, cattle herds are larger. And there's even the international communities played a role in helping to inoculate herds, to inoculate them against diseases that are found further, if I could say, south, so allowing cattle herds to move across greater swaths of land. So these are just all stressors, and but I think at the end of the day, we have got to, from the international community, again, I'll just say it again, I mean, I think we have got to listen to local communities. We've got to ensure that research is not just taken on at the national level, that surveys and all of that are conducted at the local level. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Freeman. And I think that what you touched on is extremely important, the whole of society approach, ensuring that also there is no one solution fit for all. So unless we understand the context and the culture and the needs of the communities, we will never be able to tailor the right approaches to support their well-being, their livelihood, and solution for them in different contexts and culture. I think that this was a very informative conversation, but I'm sure that maybe some of the audience would like to ask some question, taking advantage of having such expertise in the room. So I would like to open the floor, if you don't mind, to have a couple of questions. I know you are always asking questions, and it's always very relevant. So please, Masako, can no.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Valerie. I'm from Indiana University, also from the States. So my question was, how can gender-sensitive data be collected to better inform displacement policy, but how can we also make sure that it is gender-sensitive information as well? Thank you.
Okay. So maybe we can answer this question.
Well, I mean, I think that maybe the answer is making sure that surveys are conducted at the local level, which is not always easy to do, particularly in conflict environments. So I think researchers who are conducting surveys or international organizations, just have to figure out ways to ensure that they are properly surveying the affected populations. And then ensuring, again, sampling has got to include women. Sometimes in cultures where maybe if you're doing, for example, research focus groups, for example, sometimes you cannot put women and men together in a focus group and expect that women will be able to speak openly. So the adaptation there is you try to organize separate focus groups for women. So I think it really just goes down. My theme is just being able to kind of listen at the grassroots and do the research at the grassroots, and not just at the kind of upper national level or at the level of academic institutions.
Thank you so much. I want to see if Mr. Pedro, before we close, want to say a final word.
No, and thank you very much, Deputy Special Representative, for actually providing that response, which shows definitely the wealth of your experience, and it is exactly so. Surveys need to be designed in a way that you are taking into account the social dynamics of the location where you're actually doing the research. Across the different regions, there are different norms. And as you said, in some cases, you do need to allow for there to be differentiated groups that you discuss with, especially when it comes to focus group discussions, where you allow for the voices of different social groups to be heard. When you're looking at sampling, especially for surveys, you do need to try to do this in an equitative manner. Of course, you might say, yes, it might skew the information in one way or the other, but this is something that's very important for you to make sure that you're capturing in your survey design. Especially when we're talking about such a sensitive issue around climate impacts, but also migration and conflict. For you to be able to understand specifically what the specific challenges that both women, youth, indigenous people are having, you do need to be able to create the space to very clearly and in as much detail as possible to understand their day-to-day, right? And this is something that is very difficult for you to do when you do this kind of work in a mixed group. In some places and in some cultures, and I'm sorry to have to say this, women do not feel comfortable to speak in the presence of men, especially when those men are part of their household. So you do need to make sure that you're creating different spaces to allow them to speak, and also within those groups of women to be able to make sure that you're giving a chance for each of them to actually portray what their current situation is without allowing for dominance from one or the other. So yeah, data collection is something that does require a lot of thinking and a lot of considerations, and I think that those are the ways that we can make sure that the information and data that we're actually getting from them is representative of their realities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pedro, and it was really an informative discussion with both of you and Ambassador Ahmed before he leaves. I think I want to say one last thing. Most of the displacement camps, when we go, the main household are women. They are the ones who take care of their children, make sure their protected, make sure of their livelihood, try to give him some access to health and protection and education, etc. So it's extremely important to hear their voice and have them engaged in every decision making and put them part of operationalizing every initiative. I will close this session, but I know that we have another very interesting session at 4, also talking about displacement and peace. So I know there is a lot of questions, but Ms. Freeman has to move to her next session. It was lovely having all of you, and thank you so much for listening and being with us today.